Good afternoon. My name is Donna Lucas, and I welcome you here on behalf of the PPIC Board of Directors. PPIC is pleased to present this program today featuring Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom in conversation with Mark Baldessari. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for being here today. I really appreciate it. The PPIC, this event is part of our 2017 speaker series. We would like to thank our sponsors. We could not do these series without our sponsors, and you can see them. They're listed on your program and also will be on the screen. So can we have a round of applause for our sponsors? Yes. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. At PPIC, we're a research organization, and so in this afternoon, you'll get an email from us asking what you thought about the program. We'd love your input and feedback. So if you can, fill it out. Second of all, could you please silence your phones? We don't want to make sure any phones go off during the course of the program. So it is my pleasure to introduce PPIC's President, Mark Baldessari, and also our Lieutenant Governor, Gavin Newsom. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna, thanks very much. Appreciate your comments. And we're very pleased to have Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom with us today as part of our speaker series. Probably doesn't need much of an introduction from this group, but I will just say that he's had a very distinguished career in public service. Was on the County Board of Supervisors of San Francisco, was the mayor of San Francisco, and we first met when you were running for lieutenant governor. We had, this was in 2010, we offered briefings to everybody who was running for statewide office that year. Gavin Newsom took us up on that briefing, and we were upstairs, and you took more notes than any other candidate that year, you know, and you went through all of our materials, and that was the really the start of our relationship, PPIC's relationship. Lieutenant Governor for now, the second term, nearly 8 years, and running for governor. The reason he's here today is we're having all of the gubernatorial candidates that reach a certain threshold in the polls. We invite them to join us so that you have an opportunity to see what kind of leadership we will have next for California from the possibilities of the people who are running for governor. And today we have Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom. The June primary, only 7 months away. Yeah. The next general election, less than a year away now, November 6, 2018.
Amen.
So this is for all very timely for us. We will start with a very broad question and then go in a number of different directions, I'm sure. And then come back to a period at the end of this time when we'll give people in the audience a chance to ask questions. And we sent a very broad question in advance for you to think about. And that is, Lieutenant Governor, thinking about all of the topics out there, what do you think are the top 3 issues that will make the most difference for California's future?
Thank you for inviting me back. Thank you guys, all of you, for the opportunity. I love being here because this is a chance to actually have a conversation that lasts more than 30 seconds, which is, of course, the perfunctory expectation of candidates for higher office. You've got to speak in sound bites, and this is an opportunity actually to explore policy in a more substantive way. So let me give it a shot. I think the 3 areas that will disproportionately be the focus of your attention, our attention, here locally, at a statewide level, and I would argue nationally, and you can extend it perhaps even internationally, are in 3 broad areas. 1, the issue of debt and demographics. Number 2, issues of energy and climate change. And 3, perhaps the most vexing of all, the issue that defines all other issues, and that is the issue of IT and globalization, detonating at the same time. Let me briefly explain what I mean by all three. Issues of debt and demographics. We have an aging ingrained population in this state and in this nation. In California, between 2017, this year, and 2027, the senior population 65 and over will grow by roughly 78%, just shy of 78%. The number of children 0 to 4 will actually decline in the state of California in the next decade. I say debt in that context because as a progressive Democrat, I'm not naive to the commitments we've made and the commitments we must fulfill. Nor am I naive as a former mayor of the challenges of meeting those commitments. It's not, I think, lost on you that this state has struggled in the past on the issues of pensions, unfunded health care liability. Cities like Richmond are facing the prospects by 2021, by one estimate, that upwards of 41% of their general fund will go to retiree contributions. I'll repeat that, not 2031, 2021. In LA County, it's roughly, or LA City, it's roughly 20%. Again, these are rough numbers. These are serious issues, and we have to address them. And they're very much connected to the issue of demographics. We have technology that's shortening our careers, and we have technology that's lengthening our lives. And people want to live in dignity, want to live in place, and we're going to have to make kind of investments, and not just resources, but be very resourceful in terms of how we approach that issue. Number two, the issue of energy and climate change. Look, I'm here as your acting governor with an international leader in the name of Governor Jerry Brown, who stepped up and stepped in. 5 days after we pulled out of Paris, he pulled out of his driveway, made his way to the airport, flew to Beijing to meet with President Xi as a head of a state, not as head of state, to sign another memorandum of understanding. The governor, I'm sure, will come back with half a dozen more from this week-plus long trip to the Vatican and the European Union. This state, more than any other state, has set ambitious goals: 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels by 2012, double our energy efficiency, get to 50% renewables, which I assure you by this time next year will probably be marked to 100% by 2045, to increase by roughly, or at least get to 25% of all of our vehicles to be zero emission by 2035. I can go on and on and on, press conference after press conference, signatures after signatures, setting audacious goals. The next governor has to deliver all those goals. And number three, and I'll be as brief as possible, the issue that animates my anxiety: work, future work. Nature of change of work styles, work arrangements, contingent workers, seasonal workers, peak time contributions, these participation platforms, these the gig economy, as some have referred to it. The days of having a job or even a career are giving way to something radically different. And as a consequence, we need to think in terms of portable benefits. We need to think in terms of retirement security in a radically different way. That's already happening, but the real tsunami, not the silver tsunami of demographics, but the other real tsunami coming our way, is the issue of automation. I was just telling Mark, just in the back here, I just finished a series of Teamster endorsement meetings. It's not lost on the Teamsters. The number one job in the United States of America for men, number one job for men in the United States of America is driving. Not just the 3.5 million truck drivers, but driving writ large. All those jobs are on the edge of automation. You think about the top 4 job categories in the United States: retail being number 1, cashiers being number 2, food and beverage being number 3, and office clerks number 4. All of those professions on the edge of automation. You may not subscribe to the 2013 Oxford study that said 702 job categories, that 47% of those jobs are subject to automation. But you may subscribe to PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, that suggests 38% are, or perhaps, as one of the sponsors, McKinsey, would say, no, we subscribe to our report that says that 60% of all job categories are subject to 30% automation. That's massive displacement. And that requires some nimbleness. It requires a different conversation around issues of education, issues in terms of skills, and issues in terms of how we approach a future where the issues of social mobility, income and wealth inequality will be substantially impacted by these changes. So there, broadly, is the three areas, I think, that will highlight most of our conversations, at least anew, in the next 10 years or so in this state and country.
Very good. Let me follow up on your last point about the workforce and the economy, because if I look at our polls, the number one issue for Californians is jobs in the economy. And if I think about the last election, the 2016 election, it might have been framed a little bit differently, more towards globalization, but certainly anxiety around work was a big theme in the national election. And I see that as a likely theme around the 2018 election that you will be a part of. So, and we just came out with some fact sheets this week that, to me were absolutely shocking in terms of the level of poverty and child poverty in particular in California.
Right.
So, if you're elected governor, in 2019, what steps do you start to take that are going to add to jobs in California, do something to reduce poverty, and do this in a way that's not going to lead to greater income inequality in the future?
Yeah.
How do you address this issue?
So, as a small business person, and some of you may know, we've got 20 plus small businesses. We've got 700 plus employees in the state. And I say that not to impress you, but to impress upon you, I'm passionate about entrepreneurialism. Mm-hmm. It's not something someone handed me a focus group memo, and I looked at PPIC polling, come up and said, what, jobs in the economy, it's been a big part of my life. And one of the predicates in our business is, that we, that the answers to our questions are out there, but not necessarily within our organization. So you got to case other people's joints, in the vernacular of some businesses. It's about best practices. And it's just interesting to me in California, we don't have that orientation, haven't in decades. It's lack of intentionality as it relates to economic and workforce development. There is no statewide economic and workforce development plan. If there is one, I'd like to have the benefit of that work. There are a lot of organizations that have come up with recommendations, but there's not an overreaching or overriding set of goals by industry and cluster. And so as a consequence, I didn't wait around to announce my candidacy for governor to address that. I hired McKinsey, strong bias, and the Brookings Institute, and decided to look at best practices across the country and around the rest of the world, because you can't look at a $2.6+ trillion economy backdrop. Has to be global when you look at California's economy. And the fact that we're the 6th, 5th largest, depending on how Brexit goes, in the world. And so we were informed by Singapore, by South Korea, by Bavaria and their exports strategies. By the way, Bavaria, I don't want to get too deep into Bavaria. Bavaria is interesting because of their manufacturing renaissance and the fact that they're a highly regulated market, both labor and from an environmental perspective. A lot of interesting best practices that we can translate. And so we put together an economic strategy for the state. And there lies the answer to your question. I don't want to burden you with all 23 specific policy proposals, but they're available for your review. The principle is this: it's about regions rising together. Statewide vision will not be realized top-down. It has to be realized bottom-up. It's really 14 economic and workforce development plans. Each region's unique. Each region is distinctive. Inland Empire, San Joaquin Valley, very different than LA County, very different than the Bay Area. And so you have to approach things with more nuance and complexity. But here, in order to connect two dots, is where I am now. That plan's a few years old. We've updated it a few times. But the imperative for me now is very different. I think we need to do something at scale. And Eloy's here, runs the community college system. He's going to have to be a big part of this, whether I'm your next governor or not. I'm so concerned about this skills gap that I think we need to do something at scale. We need to put together what I would refer to as transformation maps, looking at each industry in the state, each cluster, and mapping out where those jobs, where those skills, where those business needs are going in the next 3 to 5 years, not the next 20 to 30 years. Map that out in partnership with the private sector. Then develop curriculum and skills to match the workforce needs. And here's the idea that I think is novel. Create a framework where we develop the opportunity to access individual learning accounts. And in Singapore, they actually came out with a similar strategy based on your age, where those accounts are substantially higher in terms of credits the older you are, recognizing the challenges of lifelong learning and the issues related to the nature of change in the economy and how it impacts people, not just on the basis of skills education, but also gender, and obviously the difficulties for a 56-year-old UPS driver to transition in this economy. They'd be reimbursable accounts, and we'd work to partner with our community college system to provide the curriculum and potentially some of the MOOCs to create nano degrees and to create the opportunity to substantively at scale address the skills gap. I don't think any candidate for governor is talking at that scale. And with respect, if we're not, I think we're missing what's happening in this economy. I have no interest in failing more efficiently. I have no interest in playing in the margins. You have to be audacious at this moment. And we have got to look at these issues at a scale and scope that is required of this moment, at peril of the issues of wealth and income inequality truly exploding. And don't get me wrong, PPIC just made the point that's been made ad nauseum. We lead the nation in poverty, not just adult poverty, but childhood poverty. And you came out with your supplemental index with Stanford, which only underscores the imperative of doing something more audacious: growth and inclusion. We have missed the second half of that equation. Growth and inclusion. Enhanced EITCs, wage subsidies, which I can get into. I'm not at UBI, I'm not at Mincome, I'm not there with universal basic income like everybody else is. I believe in wage subsidies. I believe in employment insurance, not unemployment insurance. That's a deeper conversation perhaps for all of us. And obviously the notion of portable benefits has to be front and center, so we can get pro rata contributions on workers' comp, on healthcare and retirement for those that are providing peak contributions in all of these participation platforms. Forgive me for being a little wonky here, losing 90% of you, but for the 10%, I hope we had something.
You picked the right place to be wonky.
I hope so. Well, a lot of it comes from your work. A lot of this comes from your work.
So let's continue on the audacious theme and talk about healthcare, because Medi-Cal is the biggest health insurance component in California right now. More people on Medi-Cal than anything else. The future of ACA, a question mark. You've said single-payer system.
Yeah.
Other people have said there's no way we can pay for this.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on why you support single payer? I mean, I understand how it fits with your view of where the economy is going and the gig economy and so forth, but we've got Medi-Cal potentially at risk here, and then we've got to move to a single payer system that we're not sure how it's going to pay for itself. So how do we do this, in your opinion?
So the CSU yesterday, day before yesterday, lamented about the fact the governor's budget, which increases the baseline contribution to the CSU, doesn't even pay for the fixed costs increase at the CSU. So invariably, we're going to have another tuition conversation. We'll have the same exact one at the UC, if not next week, 2 months from now. Why? I would argue disproportionately because of the issue of healthcare. Your tuition increases in the past have dominantly been healthcare tuition increases. I think it's sort of fascinating. No one ever asked the question, how are you going to afford to pay for existing services, let alone the incremental services all the candidates are proposing? No one's ever asked that question. Because the fact is, we can't afford not to do something radically different in our healthcare system. The current system is fragmented. The current system is wasteful, respectfully. The current system is not sustainable. I mentioned unfunded healthcare liability. You look at this budget in the last 10 years, healthcare is devouring the budget of this state across the board, devouring the budget of the city and county of San Francisco. We don't have a choice. We've got to lean in. Now, if you support a multi-payer system and you have some way to cover everybody and then create a framework where you can spread that wealth and figure out a way to keep those premiums at bay, I'd love to learn more about it because it hasn't been done in this country. And it's certainly not being done in California. You got a 13.2 and 12.5% increase, and that's politifactable increase, the California Health Exchange, in the last 2 years. That's with the current system. Yet you still have 3+ million people who don't have health care in this state. It's bankrupting the state. So do I believe in single payer? Yeah, because it's the only way of ultimately addressing the legitimate crisis of costs and lack of confidence for quality care in this country. Now, ideally, it would be done at a national frame. It would be ideally done with Medicare for all. We have the pathway, we have a framework, and we understand how to do it. But in the absence of that, in a state as large as ours, which probably has a population larger than what, but 40 countries in the world, where the rest of the world has sort of figured this out within a margin of error, and people can disagree with their type of single payer, whether it be the Italian version or the Swiss version or the new Taiwanese version or the Canadian version and how effective they are. But they've moved in that direction. So the question is, can a state of 40 million folks that spends $367.5 billion a year, that's UCLA, that's more than $1 billion every day on healthcare, can we do it a little bit better and a little bit differently? Yes, we have to address the GAN limits. Yes, we have to address Prop 98. Yes, we have to deal with existing collective bargaining contracts. Yes, it requires a federal waiver, which ironically is the only thing the Trump administration seems hell-bent to actually provide. It also requires leadership and creativity. But in the absence of that leadership and creativity, put on your seatbelts, folks. You have an LVN crisis, an RN crisis today. We're almost bedlocked in terms of providing support for our seniors. Assisted living, folks live until 85, 90, 100. I mean, where's this going to end up? And so I know people are outraged by this conversation. I know my opponents want to exploit it for political benefit by saying it's snake oil or something. But I think snake oil is not taking on this issue head on. And interestingly, and forgive me, I have a little experience with this. The same folks said we couldn't provide universal health care at a city level. We proved them wrong. San Francisco is the only city in the United States of America with universal health care, regardless of pre-existing conditions, ability to pay, and regardless of your immigration status. They said it couldn't be done. And I was very proud. 10-year anniversary is coming up, and San Francisco Chronicle ran this front page story a couple weeks back, basically celebrating aspects of it, lamenting others. It's hardly perfect. It's not portable. You can't bring it with you. But it's a framework, and it's a framework in the absence of the single-payer system that I'm committed also to advancing in this state. I'm not going to walk away from health care. It's not about platitudes. It's not about critiquing others. I feel a sense of obligation and commitment on this issue. And I feel very, very passionately that this country needs to move with some urgency to provide this framework. And in the absence of that, this state needs to see if it's possible to do it at a statewide level.
And what do you say to the people who say, show me the money?
Show me the money. I mean, the fact is, the one argument that I do not subscribe to is that a single-payer system costs more.
Okay.
I mean, it's the only argument that, for me, with all due respect, absolutely makes no sense. How could a system that does not require a framework of profits, does not require marketing expenses at the scale of the current multi-payer system, that replaces the multi-payer system, is not built on top of it, which is one of the great mythologies of this debate. How is it possible, with all the evidence around the world, in every single nation, not 4 or 5, every single one, that proves that it's cheaper, how is it possible that people are debating whether or not it's cheaper to do it here in California, except they have an ideological opposition to disrupting the status quo, which, by the way, I know a lot of folks in this room are friends of mine. You do as well, because you're beneficiaries of it. And that's not an indictment. Thank you. I'm also a beneficiary of your work and the current system. But you know what? I'm a beneficiary because I have a nice job. And you know what? My mom didn't have that kind of support. And there are millions of others that don't. And I got to look out for them, not just me, and most of us in this room. And so, you know, I get this is tough medicine, literally and figuratively, but I like the purchasing power of a single payer system. I like the ability. You know, I know a little about economies of scale. I've got 9 liquor licenses, and it, you know, trust me, I'm able to go to a distributor and buy wine at a much cheaper price than when I had that little wine store on Fillmore and Greenwich. I get economies of scale. You give me California and a $400 billion a year spend, we've got a different kind of conversation on prescription drugs. We have a different kind of conversation with our healthcare system, and I think that actually can inure to reducing costs and increasing benefits.
Thank you.
Personal opinion.
So the biggest item in the general fund is K through 12 in California.
$92.5 billion this year.
Biggest item is K through 12. Whether or not a governor defines themselves as an education governor, by virtue of the fact that that's where most of the money is going, and that's where the issues of demographics and the workforce start in California. Let's talk about K through 12. We've tried a lot of different things in the last few years. We have Common Core. We have a local control funding formula. We've got new testing standards. We still have shocking racial disparities in outcomes in California, leading us all to ask the question of what can we do to improve the achievement gap that still exists today, and that is going to be the #1 issue in K-12 education.
Well, dumb as we want to be, the achievement gap's a readiness gap. The neuroscience is in. I don't know, it's just amazing to me. I sit here in those UC, CSU, and we lament about remediation and talk about the achievement gap when people aren't being left behind, they're start behind. I mean, honestly, if you want to get serious, I mean, if we actually want to solve this as opposed to lament about it and then have this conversation 12 years from now, and I'd love to be the ex-governor coming here with 5 others saying, you know, what's wrong with our achievement gap? You got to begin at the beginning. And that's with respect, not just preschool. Been there, done that. We did it in the city. It's prenatal care. Over half the births in California are Medi-Cal births. If we don't have a prenatal plan, you shouldn't be running for governor. #2, it's 0 to 3, not just 0 to 3 years old, which is 85% of the brain development, it's 0 to 3 months. The #1 predictor, and you all know this, former CEO of Kaiser loves saying it, who's helped us with some of these ideas. He says the #1 predictor of whether or not you're going to end up in the prison system by the time you're 18 is the number of words you speak in kindergarten. And then it begs the question, what's the biggest reform on education? Prenatal care, a framework 0 to 3, a real commitment on that 32 million word gap, not 30 million. You actually read it. And getting serious about providing access, quality to quality preschool. Then you're having a different kind of conversation in terms of education, reform, and ultimately addressing the issues of the achievement gap and the costs associated with all of these remediation courses and the lack of success. We're so consumed by access. No one has ever questioned whether or not we should continue to fund a system the way we currently fund it with so little incentives to outcomes, where all the incentives are the inputs, which is just jaw-dropping to me. With respect, and Eloy's here, and no one, he's one of my education heroes, and we've worked together for years. I'm not just saying it because he's here. I say it everywhere. But Eloy will be the first to say, you can't even get folks graduated at the community colleges. It's about less than 10% of people, less than 10% of people graduate community college in 2 years. Not even half in 6. That's community college. The UC and CSU, you know the same stats. CSU, famously, infamously, was at 19% a year and a half ago. I think we're bouncing above 21 right now. Our 4-year graduation rates, 19% 4-year graduation rates. Can't make it up. And our 6-year graduation rates are still less than 60%. So if you're going to, I mean, I don't know, if we just all got in a room and we said we're going to design a new system, that's the answer. Everything else is just Band-Aid. Everything else is pablum. Everything else is, yes, I will work hard to invest and kind of address the issue of disparity in the African-American Latino community, and we're going to do more to make sure there's cultural competency and make sure we recruit more teachers that look like our, all that. I got that. We got 15 points, and I got that plan too. But I really think that's just a way of answering the question in a way that gets you to shake your head and not really to shake the problem. And so I really, really feel strongly that our interventions on poverty, interventions on education reform come too late. By the way, it also includes a California promise that creates a college-going culture. It creates a framework to guarantee transferability. It provides resources. California, as you know, or San Francisco is the only city with a college savings account for every single kindergartner. I want to do that in all 1,000+ school districts in this state. That's one of our plans. That is easily achievable and easily funded. And we think that is a significant thing. All of those are, yes, part of an education paradigm. But I'll tell you, if it's just about beating up teachers, and that's our education reform, I think you may win a political argument, but you're not going to do much to substantively address these problems.
So what this has in common with the discussions around single payer, because it's not that people haven't raised this issue the last few years, in the legislature, issues of expanding preschool and prenatal have taken place. It all comes down to, how are we going to make that financial commitment?
Right.
And so what are your thoughts about how you go from knowing what concept is going to work to actually being able to apply it in the next gubernatorial administration?
Well, the San Francisco didn't wait around for Schwarzenegger to say, hey, I've got an idea for you. Why don't you do universal preschool? We did it. We did it in the middle of a recession. Did it when we were making massive cuts, layoffs. We valued it. We did universal health care at the same time. Remember, I mean, we kind of forget where we were in 2008, 2009, 2010. What do you value? What do you prioritize? I mean, the state, there's no such thing as a state pill for every problem. I get that. So you've got to create conditions. You've got to create the environment at the local level to animate better behavior. Cities, counties, regions, public-public partnerships, not just public-private partnerships. Why do you have an independent library system sitting right next to a school? Why do you have nurses and doctors at a clinic down the block and not in the classroom? How can we start connecting dots? I mean, our answer, and again, go on our website, you'll see my community school strategy. Bring arts education, bring wellness centers back in the schools to address the issues that persist outside of the school gates, which have an impact inside the school yard as it relates to the issues of poverty. Schools solve poverty, but poverty impacts schools. You've got to address the contextual conditions. I think there are different ways of approaching these issues. And does that get into some controversial issues about lowering thresholds on, dedicated funding and on bonds at the local level? Yeah, I'm willing to go there to help support some of those efforts, to support local government, to make investments. Does it require leadership at a national level to argue, for example, for summer Pell expansion? To make that a real priority in terms of our federal? Yeah, so I think it's not just a question of the general fund of the state. It's a question of working with 470+ cities and 58 counties and developing a framework of engagement and real leadership by having statewide goals. There are no statewide goals almost on any issue. I mean, honestly, what's the higher education statewide goal? I mean, I know PPIC says it should be 1.1 million folks by 2030. But then I got another report from one of you that says it's 1.7 by 2025. And then I had someone who said, well, it's not about degrees, it's about skills. A degree is not a proxy for a job, so everyone's got it wrong. So can we have the conversation by at least establishing a framework? And by the way, the goals should include not just the 3 systems of public education, but all folks out there being privately educated. All come together. So it's, again, I'm offering sort of the contextual framework to where I think we can solve problems.
The current governor eliminated the California Post-Secondary Education Commission, which was, if you go back to the master plan, put in place so to make the three systems work together. Do you think that some coordinating activities needed, or some? The current governor also eliminated the Secretary of Education. Right?
Yeah.
Where do you go? Where do you go in terms of how do you get these goals in place?
So we laid out a specific plan on this, which is to establish statewide vision with statewide goals on not just access but completion. We laid out specific issues of funding and affordability. The original sin on higher education is lack of state investment. The issues, obviously, of the cost of going to college are not just tuition. It's a very small percentage for some. The real costs are connected to the Cal Grant B program. And so we have specific ideas on that. I'm working with Eloy on this notion of free community college. The governor signed a bill that's just not funded to do it for the first year. Eloy is working to get the money. But it wasn't a jaw-dropping number. It's $31-ish million a year on a $185 billion budget. I think we can provide free community college. And by the way, we have these BOG waivers already where 50% of everybody roughly gets free community college. 70% of full-time people already get it. So we're not dealing with that big of an increment, but it creates a profound mindset we can achieve. I'm committed to that. Then it goes to the issue of data. It'd be nice to start collecting data. Forgive me, I'm not one of those, but I do feel like we got a lot of data sets that are disconnected in silos that need to be coordinated through, yes, a coordinating council, which is also a part of our five-legged stool, not three.
Thank you. So let me ask you about some other long-term, future-oriented things. You mentioned climate change and energy, and I do want to talk about that. But first, I want to ask you about investments in water and transportation. Our governor has made very clear, the Delta tunnels, high-speed rail, the transportation tax that was passed this year. What are your priorities in water and transportation?
So I think a lot of good things have actually happened in the last few years that don't seem to get a lot of attention. And I want to give credit where credit's due. We passed a $7.5 billion water bond. I know a lot of the attention's on the $2.7 billion that's attached to storage and whether or not that's above ground storage or it's about groundwater replenishment or below ground storage, which a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, have strong opinions. Is it the sites are temperance flat, or is it different ways of achieving the same goals, conjunctive use? But in there is a lot of really good things. People talk about the importance of recycling. Well, there's $725 million of recycling. There's groundwater cleanup, $900 million of that bond's groundwater cleanup. A lot of innovation grants, a lot of good things. We're not even yet fully applying that are opportunities in the next few years. In addition to that, we did finally start to reconcile some of the issues of the number of straws we've dipped in the ground. So we were sipping water that was dropped at the time of the pharaohs. We're building the pyramids a few thousand feet down and addressing the drought by just sucking more water out of the ground. And finally, we're starting through data to measure some of that. And with that, ultimately, will come some transparency and ultimately some accountability. That's a good thing. And we've got a governor whose legacy seems to be attached to some issues of conveyance, which, depending on if I'm talking to my father, who wants me to chain myself in the governor's office and deny him the ability to ever talk about the Twin Tunnels again, or folks down at the Met who feel like I should be incarcerated if I don't talk about the Twin Tunnels. He's got a lot at stake in the next few months to call that question, which has been called now. You got 10 water agencies that have voted, 84%, as you guys know, of the state side that's been funded. So the governor actually has money. Question is, how does he fund the gap, which seems now more and more unrealistic for a twin tunnel, but has now opened up the PPIC question of a single tunnel, or the NRDC, depending on who you're working for, and their 2013 proposal on a single tunnel. So I appreciate the governor's framework, which is about protecting the ecosystem and coming up with the right form of conveyance. Walking away from this issue, is unacceptable and simply is not a solution. And so the governor has some runway. He has some real resources. He's very resourceful. And we are going to engage in a conversation around most important plumbing solution in California that impacts 3 million acres of land and 25 plus million of all of us. It's not a north-south issue. I'm just not willing to accept that frame with all due respect. It's so much more complicated than that. And it's not a top-down statewide issue. 400 water agencies represent 90% of water consumers, local water agencies. Interesting, 84% of all the spend on water is local. A small percentage, about 12% state, 4% federal. So you've got to look bottom up, not top down when it comes to this. And I know a little about this. I chair the State Lands Commission. We had a raging debate about desalinization in Huntington Beach last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago. And we had all the Orange County folks. Orange County's just, it's mesmerizing, their leadership on, toilet to tap strategies, on groundwater replenishment, on innovative and unique strategies. There's a lot of remarkable things happening at the local level on water policy and efficiency programs and the like that also need to be amplified and need to be exported as well in this conversation. So I'm not as pessimistic around this, though I recognize the hots are getting hotter, the dries are getting drier, the wets are getting wetter. So that's a stormwater capture strategy as well. And we haven't seen nothing yet. And we need to lean in aggressively on this. But I really want to give credit where credit's due. The governor and the legislature, I think, have done some very important things. And it creates a foundation for the next governor to build off of. And I feel a lot more optimistic.
Okay, so let's transition from that topic to climate change and energy. So you've talked about a lot of goals that will be the responsibility of the next governor. There'll be some costs associated with that. There'll hopefully be some benefits as well. How are you gonna build on what's taken place in climate change and energy over the last 5 or 6 years?
Well, by actually doing the work.
And what does that mean?
They're just goals. We've established goals. We have a fully functioning cap and trade program, don't get me wrong, but the first iteration of that was relatively easy. Second iteration's a little bit more challenging. So it's not an indictment. I admire the leadership, and heck, when I was mayor, I was very good at establishing audacious goals as well, so I kind of get it. Poor Ed Lee. But you got to double all local actions. Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading a great study. 3% of the world's population in 1800 lived in cities, 14% in 1900. And it was 2008. Though Francesco was running our Department of Environment, who's here. I don't know if it was we said it 2005. I think it was technically 2008 when the majority of people on the planet were living in cities versus suburban and rural areas. So we are dominantly becoming urbanized. And so you can't look at the issue of total consumption without considering the frame of local consumption. You look at it from an international frame, about 70% of greenhouse gas emissions by one estimate emanate out of cities. 2/3 of the resources are consumed by cities. So cities are going to be front and center in this conversation. And that's a very familiar place. I love that. I'm the composting guy. I was out there in plastic bags and plastic water bottles. I did the green building standards and required, that we did local solar incentives no other city did. This is exactly where we need to go, but at scale. And yes, that's about storage at scale. It's about methane capture, which has got to be a big part of it. And it's about having this conversation anew about regionalizing the grid. And if Jerry can't figure that out, I would love to be able to figure that out, because therein lies a real opportunity. And that has to be part of the specific core conversation, has to be part of this solution as well. And I think that's a broad strokes of how we apply these principles, which I absolutely and enthusiastically embrace. And I am, I was the EV1 guy that was driving around that was going to steal my own car before Saturn took it back. And, I'm passionate about electric cars. I think I'm a opponent in this campaign that apparently doesn't like electric cars so much, but I do. I'm passionate about moving to green our grid and to make sure that we're out there and achieving some of these audacious goals that were set. But look, this is what we do best. The world's looking to our leadership. This is all about jobs. This is about opportunity. This is California's fate and future. You know, if we can't do it, no one's going to do it.
Okay. So I want to ask you a question, which I think is on everyone's minds. The current governor.
Everyone.
Yeah, everyone, according to our latest poll. Current governor.
That's funny.
And the next governor have to figure out how to relate to Washington in terms of the current federal-state relation, which is very different from what it was a year ago. So what do you think how would you describe, in a few sentences, the qualities of leadership that are needed for the California governor to relate to federal government?
I mean, I think, you know, we want to continue to be the center of the resistance, but you also have to provide a positive alternative. Success leaves clues, the power of emulation.
So what are the areas of resistance?
Well, I mean, obviously on immigration reform, no state has more to lose than the state of California. And by the way, with all due respect, it's not an indictment. Please don't read between the lines or even believe I'm suggesting this. But I was frustrated a little bit as a citizen, as a lieutenant governor, that we ceded some of the federal immigration conversation to Jan Brewer and Rick Perry, which we tended to do. I don't think we can afford to do that. Protect our dreamers, and protect the framework of DACA, to protect both valleys, Silicon Valley and the H-1B conversation, or the Central Valley, or even Salinas on the coast around the new drought, which is the issue of talent and addressing the issues of the most diverse state. And so we need to assert ourselves. Healthcare, you're absolutely right. These guys they believe in addition by subtraction. I don't. And so we got to push back on that. Can't just play for saves.
So what are the areas in which you think that we should be looking for common ground?
Well, you know, I think if infrastructure is not just about privatizing every road and bridge and port, I think that's an area. If this president wakes up to the reality that manufacturing jobs aren't necessarily coming back, but we can build on our manufacturing, I think that's an area where we have an opportunity. Remember, this is still the biggest manufacturing state in America. People actually don't believe that. It's objective fact. It's still a huge part of our economy. We've lost a lot of our share, but it's still a manufacturing state. I don't want to give that up. I think that's an area. If he cares about jobs in the economy, he has to care about California's job in an economic climate, because he can't achieve his goals without achieving our goals. He's got the magic, 3% GDP growth. Well, come to California, Mr. President. We've been there, done that. 4.4, 3.7% GDP growth in the last few years. A little slow the last year, slowing down a tiny bit. So I think those are areas of common ground. And let me just say this, I admire the president in this one area. He didn't play politics in the Oroville Dam on the emergency declaration. He didn't play politics up in Santa Rosa, hasn't yet. FEMA did some good things this week. That's important. And so in many ways, I think the governor has played this really well. And I am studying him.
Okay, good. Well, I've studied this audience, and I think they're ready to ask you some questions. I've got about 100 more, but I want to give them a chance. So let's start on this side, and then I'll try to get a question on each side. Thank you. Yes?
Didn't answer the question about high-speed rail. I'd like to know your current position on that.
Forgive me, I didn't.
He said that you didn't address the question of high-speed rail, and he was wondering what your thinking is on high-speed rail.
No, I'm sorry, honestly,
right?
I didn't hear it. I hardly would avoid it, particularly having been a strong advocate and one of the early co-chairs of the campaign that was very proud to be there with Ray LaHood and with every fancy politician in the state to do the groundbreaking of the Grand Central Station on the west coast of the United States, the Transbay Terminal, before I left as mayor. And I'm very proud of what's happened down there. The problem was I promoted a $33 billion project, of which a third of the money was going to come from the feds, a third of the money from the private sector. It's no longer a $33 billion project. As you know, the project ballooned to $98 billion. It's been valued engineered down to a current price tag of $64. We've gotten no private sector money, not a dollar. Hyperloop's gotten close to $250 million. And we are not receiving any additional money, at least in the short term, federal money beyond the 3.2 to 3.5, depending on how you analyze how much they actually have given. So we got a big funding gap. Appreciate the governor being creative with the cap and trade program. He originally wanted a third of the money. He's getting 25% of the money. And the idea is to potentially trade that certainty for some private sector investment. If the governor could pull that off, he deserves all the credit in the world. And Governor Schwarzenegger / Governor Brown's legacy, because remember, it's hardly happened on Brown's watch. I give Governor Schwarzenegger a lot of credit. Their legacy may be secured. In the absence of that, I think this project, and here's my being pundit, becomes a phase 1 project. And I think the real losers in that are the folks south of the Tehachapis and San Gabriel Mountains. Because right now, phase 1 is not down south, phase 1 is valley to valley. And while that's significant, and I'll tell you, it will be significant for the fate and future of the valleys, both valleys, and with the electrification that will inure to our benefit with Caltrans, it leaves people in the southern part of the state wanting. And that's a real issue, and that's an open-ended question. So I want to see this thing happen, because I've long been an advocate, but I've also expressed real questions about the current business plan, which apparently in politics is not a very smart thing often, because when you openly question things, people then sort of subscribe motivation, they subscribe their own bias to the why. For me, it's the exploration of truth, and I connect it to a local dot. You may recall we did Laguna Honda Hospital in San Francisco. Sandra is here, she remembers it well. I think the bond, Sandra, was it $299 million? Always thought, why $299? And you know what? It really, was frustrating. I questioned it because I said, you know what? We're just poll testing the bond. Why don't we ask for what we need? If you're going to make a commitment for 1,200 beds, this is what it's going to cost. Let's do the work. And the fact is, we didn't know how much it was going to cost. And we put it on the ballot. It passed. But you know what happened? We never built 1,200 beds. It cost a lot more than even some people had projected. And it left the voters going, you know what? Government, politicians. And I don't think that's healthy. You got one thing that matters in government: trust. The biggest issue in this country right now is lack of trust. It's the biggest issue in the Delta, trust. And so when we did the San Francisco General Hospital bond, some of you may recall, it was an $884.5-ish million bond. 884.5. Because we actually put up $25 million of general fund to figure out what it would cost. And we decided to give it a shot and say, you know what, if we give it the truth, let's see where the voters are. The voters overwhelmingly embraced it because they didn't feel played. They felt like we were being honest with them. And my only point about high-speed rail, let's be honest about it. If it's 64, is it? We being honest about that? Does it come at a cost of regional transit solutions? Does it come at a cost in terms of our energy efficiency program because we don't have that 25% from cap and trade, or come at a cost to impact our affordable housing issues where we can play a little bit with some of the jobs housing linkages and density bonuses in order to create a more sustainable framework of investment? And if it does, let's be honest with people. And that's my only critique, as it were, around this subject matter. It's not the vision, but it's the application of the vision that I think, frankly, pulls people away, doesn't bring people together.
Another question. Yes, back here. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Gavin. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about affordable housing. We're not at a crisis anymore. We're at a catastrophe. And what are ideas you have around public policy, and particularly around addressing things like Proposition 13 and other things that have contributed
I'm
to
glad
it?
you asked that question. It was on my list. Thanks.
Well, I want to increase from 85 million, phase it in over a few years. I'd like to get it up to 500 million, the low-income housing tax credit. Reason why is leverage is 2 to 3 times from the federal government. Now that's all pending this tax reform. It's just jaw-dropping. I mean, that any Republican in the state of California can support this tax measure is just, it's grounds for being replaced. Each and every one of them, shameful. But it's upwards of $1.5 to $2 billion of additional federal monies, if all things are equal, by increasing the low-income tax credit specific to affordable housing. I also want to create the successor agencies that we promoted from redevelopment, and that's these enhanced infrastructure financing districts. Interestingly, we have a few in the state. San Francisco has a version to capture tax increment. One of the best is in San Diego and in Truckee. Truckee, California. Coldest place on earth sometimes. But they're doing it well. So I want to build on that. We have other specific ideas that you'll find on our housing platform on the website. That begins, by the way, with supporting that $4 billion bond that was just negotiated at the state level, because it also includes in there some money for the missing middle, which we don't talk a lot about. Workforce housing, where jobs go to sleep. That's a huge issue. People earning 80 to 120% of AMI, arguably 80 to 150% of area median income. You can argue 60 to 150, but I don't want to get off on a tangent. That's critical. So that's the contours of it. But on the housing, we got a bigger problem. It's simple: supply-demand imbalance. You're 3.5 million housing units short of where we need to be by 2025. By the way, that's a real number. Another McKinsey number. And I respectfully submit that those that want to double housing production, that's not interesting, because you're not going to impact the cost curve. So if the goal is actually to achieve a result that's meaningful, you've got to more than triple, arguably quadruple housing production on an annual basis. That means you got to develop about 378,000 housing units on an annual basis. We haven't done that since, I think, 1954-ish. But we've done it. And how do you do that? Incentives and disincentives. Want to move the mouse, you got to move the cheese. Got to change incentives for good behavior. And right now we have incentives for bad behavior. Cities have no incentive to develop housing, none. Cities capture sales tax revenue. Cities love big auto malls, big box retail. Counties love housing, property tax. Right now, we have perverse incentive that doesn't incentivize cities to meet their housing goals. I think that needs to be reconsidered. I think MTC, very local for you, is doing some novel things on transportation funding. I think we should link some of our state and federal transit dollars to meeting general plan and housing element goals. I think we can pull some of that back, because those things are connected. Jobs, housing linkages, transportation, housing have to be connected. These are additional points among many that we have laid out in detail on our website.
I'm tempted to ask about Prop 13, because that wasn't mentioned.
I'm not interested in Prop 13 in isolation. I'm interested in tax reform.
Okay.
Can I just say, because this is really important, if you're not interested in tax reform, you should be, because when we catch a cold, our budget's going to catch the flu.
Yeah.
And the fact is, at what point are we going to wake up and say, why don't we tax the economy that exists, not the economy that's 100 years old? And there are a lot of proposals out there that have to be dusted off, and we're going to need a governor. I know Jerry is interested in this, but I know it's tough with the timeline. But we're going to have to look more comprehensively at broader tax reform. Forgive me.
So I feel like I should ask a question from this side of the room. Bruce, did you have a question?
Redevelopment as we know it has gone.
County Supervisor.
Yeah,
Bruce.
a redevelopment as we know it has come and gone. There's been some small attempts to revitalize it. Do you think that it's something that should be revitalized? I mean, it really does give local governments the opportunity to engage in some real significant projects, but we don't have that now without redevelopment.
Yeah, proving I'm ineffective at communicating. That's what the IFDs are about.
Okay.
These are the successor agencies, these enhanced infrastructure financing districts that do capture the tax increment, but in a little more tailored way. Here's my thing. I'm not interested in paving over the old cow path with yesterday's redevelopment. By the way, if you're for that, I want to ask you this question: where are you going to find the $2 billion? Eloy is going to get a little upset about that. And the preschool folks are getting a little upset about that. But that's what you're talking. With tailoring and targeting with these enhanced financing districts, I think we can achieve the goal in a way that's a little bit more modernized and a little bit more targeted to addressing the issues.
I want to give you a chance before we leave, Lieutenant Governor, to tell us why you're running for governor and what we might expect if you were to become governor in a couple of sentences.
We were doing so well with the time. Look, I mean, I'm not timid. If you want timid, I'm not your guy. You know, I think, and we didn't get to the issues, and you know, it's very close to home for me. I think some of the deeper issues of our time require more sustainable thinking. I think we're so consumed by situational values up in Sacramento. I'd like to start focusing more on sustainable values, medium and long-term thinking, set some audacious goals. Homelessness, we didn't even talk about. There's lack of any intentionality in homelessness. Mental health issues, only 24 of 58 counties have comprehensive mental health services. We need to change that. Issues, opioid issues are profoundly important in California. It's not just Kermit, West Virginia. Go up to Plumas, go up to Trinity. Lake County is 27% of all the people in Lake County have been prescribed narcotics. In Plumas and Trinity, by the way, more people prescribed narcotics than there are people in those counties. It's a profound impact here in the state, and that's a prescription practice issue, but it's also about a different framework in terms of addressing treatment. I want to solve. I've always thought, and this is a long-winded point, but I'll try to distill it. I've always thought the best politics is a better idea. You guys know me. I ran on those 23 or so policy ideas as mayor. I bored everybody. Somehow I survived the race against a guy who kept saying, let's get out of Iraq to every question, and people were applauding. You know, so I'm not as good with sound bites as some others, but I really feel do justice. There's a lot of parts of the state that we have to get under the hood. We haven't gotten under the hood in decades, frankly. It's not an indictment of Jerry. I think he's been magnificent. I want to build off his legacy. Really do want to build off. He's proven you don't have to be profligate to be progressive. And I think that's a profoundly important thing. I'm a small business person. Nothing more important than being fiscally disciplined. But you got to invest in our growth engines. You got to invest in the future. You're not going to do very well there, and I think there's a lot of areas where we are not performing as we must. The reason why is simple. I love that new Bobby Kennedy book that Chris Matthews just wrote. It's the picture that if my house was in Santa Rosa, I would run back in and risk my life to get of my father and Bobby Kennedy, literally the day before he was assassinated. It was a campaign shot for my dad, who was running for state senate, naively against Milton Marks. You know how that ended. And, you know, I've always been attached to that photo and attached to Sarge Shriver, that sense of idealism, standing up for ideals, striking out against injustice. It's my why, transcends politics, kind of connects a lot of dots, issues that I've been involved in, including, you know, drug policy reform and criminal justice reform, not just marriage equality. And so the issues of wealth and income inequality are personal, and I want to be aggressive about it and addressing these disparities, but not, you know, I'm doing it in a different way, a different approach. And so those animate, I think, that my thinking, and I think we're in a good place, and I'll close with this. You know, this campaign is just 6 months in some respects, not 7 months away, because you're going to start getting absentee ballots in the mail. A lot of folks are focused, as you said, universally on Trump, but it'd be healthy to start focusing on the governor's race, and I hope you do. I think you have good Democrats in this race. I'm the one candidate that's not attacking my opponents. They seem universally to have a different approach to the campaign. I want to attack problems. And I hope in the context of this campaign, you guys can be part of that as well. And I just want to close by saying PPIC has been a big part of what's animated our approach. And the work you guys do here is exceptional. That's not just me sucking up. I have no need to, frankly, at the end of this. I should have done it in the beginning. And it
wouldn't have mattered.
And I just want to encourage like-minded people, if you are open to it, to be part of this campaign and offer your perspective, critique what you've heard, sort of set me straight, if you will, or offer a different perspective, because I want to incorporate as many voices in this campaign as possible, so that we don't only do justice to winning, but we can do justice as it relates to being effective as your next governor. So thank you guys very, very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks. We want to thank Lieutenant Governor Newsom for being here with us today, Donna for being part of our program, our sponsors, and everybody who's joined us both in the audience here and online. We want to welcome all of you to join us for coffee and dessert in the salon next. And while you're there, make sure that you look at the photo exhibit that we have that Senator Farr has loaned his from his time in Washington. You know, I think you'd enjoy seeing that. And again, Lieutenant Governor, thanks, all the best. And it was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. As always. As always. Yeah. And there were